So thanks to everyone who is here live. Let's go ahead and jump in and talk about our subject of the day, which is going to be all about tarot spreads. Okay, so I want to start really basic because if you are a total beginner, you might not even know what a tarot spread is. So a spread is just the pattern that you use as you are laying out the cards. Now, I think it's worth mentioning that not every tarot reader even uses spreads. In fact, I mentioned this in one of the other tarot gatherings that last year for my birthday, I got a reading with Jessica Dorr, who's an amazing reader, and she doesn't use spreads. She just lays out the cards and kind of starts going into them and see where it leads her. So a lot of people, even people who are very, very skilled readers, sometimes don't use spreads, but I really like using spreads. I almost always use spreads when I'm reading for myself and for other people. Once in a while, I kind of intuitively feel like I'm just going to pull some cards and see where it leads me, but I really like working with spreads. So what are some of the benefits? Why would you want to choose to work with a spread? For me, I think there are two main benefits to working with spreads versus just pulling cards. The biggest thing is a spread gives context to the cards you are pulling. Instead of just having, the Two of Cups and having infinite ways to look at that, when you're working with a spread, you have some specific context for what the Two of Cups is doing. And related to that, the second thing kind of tying into that is I think spreads help you create a narrative. Spreads help you see the story that is coming forward through your tarot cards. So that's why I really enjoy working with spreads. I think that they give a lot of context and they help you see the narrative and the story, which to me is one of the biggest benefits of tarot, is tarot creates a narrative. There's always a story at work when we're doing a reading. I see a few more people joining in to the live, so welcome if you are just tuning in. We are just getting started and we're talking about tarot spreads today. Okay, I wasn't really sure where to put this in to what I wanted to talk about, so I'm just going to mention it now. This is something that I heard when I was very first learning tarot. I think it was through Joan Bunning's course, Learning the Tarot, but maybe I'm mistaken, but I think this is where I heard this, that she was talking specifically about the Celtic Cross, which a lot of you probably know is one of the most famous, one of the most iconic tarot spreads. And she talked about how that spread has been around for so long and used so many times by so many different readers that the spread itself has kind of built up an energy around it. And she compared it to eating a meal of soup and bread. So soup and bread is like, there's so many different types of soup, there's so many different types of bread, there's so many different type of cultures who have some version of soup and bread. So the meal itself, the idea of soup and bread, has this like energy built up around it. And she compared that to a spread like the Celtic Cross. It kind of builds up this energy around it. And again, I wasn't sure where to kind of fit that into the presentation, but I just thought that was a really cool way of thinking about tarot spreads. There are certainly spreads that I will just find on Instagram or something because people are always creating amazing spreads and I might just try them one time. But when I'm working with my clients, I find I'll go through phases where I'm using the same spread over and over and over, and I really do find some truth to that there's this energy that builds up around a spread when you use it really frequently. So I guess that's kind of a bonus tip for getting started, is think about sticking with a spread for a while and see if it builds up an energy for you where it's really like you just get cozy with that spread because you're turning to that spread quite frequently. All right. Okay, let's see here. So I did want to mention some of the kind of limitations or maybe just things to consider about tarot spreads. This I've mentioned, I think, a couple of times in these tarot gatherings, but when you're looking at a big spread, like I mentioned, the Celtic Cross, that can be overwhelming if you are either new to tarot. It can be a lot of cards to try to take in at once. And the other thing with big spreads is, even if you're a more seasoned reader, sometimes they're just too much. It's amazing how much insight you can get from smaller spreads. When I'm reading for myself, most of the spreads that I use are about 3 to 5 cards. When I'm reading for clients, because I'm doing longer sessions, it's usually the spread that I use right now with my clients most commonly is about 9 cards, but I think 3 to 5 is a really good sweet spot for me generally when I'm reading for myself. So again, I've probably said this in some of these other tarot gatherings, but when I first learned tarot, the first spread that I was introduced to was indeed the Celtic Cross. And now that I'm a ways down the line, I can embrace it, and I did learn it and it worked out fine. But I would think if you are new to tarot, that might not be the best starting out point for you. You might want to think about starting with a smaller spread, maybe a 3-card spread. There's so many amazing 3-card spreads you can find online. My favorite 3-card spread is Theme, Challenge, Strength. Those are the positions that I use for my favorite 3-card spread. Okay, and then let's talk about in general. So now you've decided you want to work with spreads. I want to talk about some things to consider as you are looking at spreads and thinking about what spreads resonate with you. And maybe also this ties into why certain spreads work really well and other spreads. Sometimes you try a spread and you're just like, that was just weird. It didn't work. It didn't make sense. It didn't click for me. So I have a couple of ideas about why and things you might want to look for in spreads. This is something that this is more recently that I've come to this realization, which is that for me, one kind of red flag, I guess, so to speak, or one thing that I look for in a spread that might be a sign that it might not work that well for me, is that the spread positions are too specific. So I wanted to give an example, and I chose that with the example I'm going to give, I'm actually going to just call myself out because I looked back at some of the old spreads that I created a couple of years ago, and I found a spread I created, and one of the positions that I put in the spread, I'll read you exactly what I wrote. What immaturity can I release at this time? Now, that is a very specific spread position because I included that word, what immaturity can I release at this time? I think that I'm probably going to sound like I'm totally contradicting myself because sometimes you want something that specific, but sometimes that just puts you in too much of a box with what you can get out of that spread position. So with that specific example, one way that I might reframe it now, if I was creating that now instead of when I did a couple of years ago, would be simply to call the spread position release. Instead of expecting it to specifically tell me, here's an immaturity for me to release, if I just use the term release, that gives more room for the messages to come through to me in the way they need to come through. So I hope that makes sense the way I'm explaining it. It's definitely something to look for. If spread positions are too specific, they can really box you in with how the cards speak in the spread. I was pretty excited when I came to that realization recently because, like I said, this is something I only noticed maybe even the past year or so, that I like spreads that give a little more room for the cards to breathe. They're not so card, tell me exactly this thing. They give a little more room for the card to breathe. Okay, someone asked, can we create our own spreads? You absolutely can. In fact, a little ways down the line today, I'm going to give a couple of pieces of advice and thoughts on creating your own spreads. And I also have a blog post from a couple of years ago called How to Custom Create a Tarot Spread. So you can Google that, Carrie Mallon, How to Create a Spread, if you want to see it on my blog as well. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so that was the first thing, is looking for spread positions that are too specific. The second thing that I recommend looking for when you're looking at a spread as a whole and thinking about, is this going to be a helpful, beneficial, effective spread for me, would be, do the spread positions sing to each other? That's the way I phrased it. Do the spread positions sing to each other? What I mean by that is, again, there's so many tarot spreads out there. You can probably just scroll through your Instagram feed and come across hundreds and hundreds of tarot spreads. And I've noticed as I've been looking at some lately that sometimes a tarot spread to me, like someone puts it out there and they say this is a tarot spread, but when I look at the positions they've incorporated into it, they don't really tie into each other in any way. And I think that the way I would frame that would be that I would still maybe like to use those positions that they've included, but I would think it more as like this is a list of prompts versus this being a spread. To me, if a spread is going to be really effective, the positions have to kind of mingle, and again, I phrase it as sing to each other. An example of what I'm talking about with that, the Celtic Cross is actually a great example, and it's probably one of the reasons that spread has stuck around so long, because it has a lot of natural ways that the cards sing to each other. So for example, in the Celtic Cross, you have like below and above, or the way I often think of those positions are unconscious and conscious. So those naturally sing to each other because they're interrelated. And you have like energy moving out and energy moving in. So those also naturally sing to each other. So I hope you see what I'm saying here. I think the best spreads are spreads where there are natural ways for you to tie the cards to one another. If all of the spread positions are more just like a list of prompts, then it might be harder for there to become a narrative and for it to feel like the spread is doing something cohesive. So that's something that I always look for spreads where the positions sing to each other. Okay. I kind of already talked about this, but I want to circle back around and concentrate even further on this, because I was talking a moment ago about spread positions being too specific. Where I have landed now, more recently, is when I am either creating a spread that I'm going to use, or when I'm considering using a spread that someone else has created, I ask myself, can each of the spread positions be pared down to its essence in maybe one or two words? It's okay if, sometimes if you notice that if you go look at spreads that I've created more recently, like within the past year, usually how I do it is I'll have one or two words that are the essence of that spread position, but then I might add a sentence going into more detail to just kind of elaborate on that. But I think it's really best if you compare it down to one or two words as the essence of that spread position, because like I talked about a moment ago, that gives you more room for the cards to breathe. You want some context, you want a spread to give you a narrative, but what you don't want a spread to do is pigeonhole you, to force you into taking a card in a direction that maybe the card doesn't want to go. Do you guys see what I'm saying? I hope it makes sense. All right. Okay, where are we? Oh yeah. So let's talk about, this is one of the questions I get the most frequently. I had someone write this on one of my Instagram posts just the other day. And the question is, what do you do when a card doesn't make sense within its spread position? So I think some of the things we talked about above are a good foundation for answering that question, because sometimes the issue might not be you. The issue might be the spread. If you get to a point where you pull a card and it doesn't make sense within the spread, think about the things we already talked about. Is that spread position singing to the other spread positions? Is that spread position too specific? Does that spread position itself really work? That's where I would start. That's not something I hear very commonly. This is just this is my personal perspective, but that's where I would start, is looking at the spread itself versus, like, usually I think we start with, oh, how can I think about this in a different way, and da-da-da-da-da. And you might get to the point where, yes, you want to examine that, but start with examining the spread. You say it's helpful. Thank you. I am so glad. Okay. And let's see here. The other thing that kind of ties into that is, this is a super common question too, which is, what are some ways you can think about it when you get a positive card in a negative spread position, or vice versa? This is another question where I think we have to dive deeper into some of the assumptions behind the question before we can start to answer it. So I talk about this all the time, but I don't think it's really useful to frame cards as positive or negative. There are certainly cards that we tend to see more of I don't like that word positive, but where we do tend to see more of the joyful side more naturally in the card, like maybe the 10 of Cups or something like that. And then there's cards like the Tower where they can be kind of a lot to see sometimes, but I think it's a really helpful practice as a tarot reader. With any card in the deck, any card that you draw, you should be able to articulate to yourself what are some of the beneficial, what's like a constructive way I can look at this card, as well as what's more of the shadowy side of this card. That's a really powerful exercise to do, especially if I wasn't even planning on talking about this, but it's just kind of coming to me now. Just go through your deck and maybe put some of your cards in piles of like, these are cards that I see as more positive, or these are cards that I see as more negative, and challenge yourself to go then through each of those piles. And with your positive cards, think about what are the shadowy aspects of these cards, and with your quote-unquote negative cards, go through and think about what are the constructive, what are the beneficial, what are the helpful energies of these cards. And you can do that just as a general tarot exercise, but you can also really ask yourself to do that in a reading where you get, like, for example, the spread that I use really commonly right now with my clients. It has two positions that sing to each other, where one of them talks about things you could think about releasing and one is things to bring in. And I do sometimes have instances where like things to bring in, which feels like a quote unquote, again, I don't like those words, but like a positive position within the spread, people might get like the Tower or something like that in that position of things to bring in. So I have to just kind of ask myself to go beyond my assumptions about that card and think about what could be some empowering things to bring in about the Tower. Some of you may know, because I say this all the time as well, that the Tower, probably the reason the Tower is often an example I bring up is it's actually one of my favorite cards. Can it be very difficult to work with? Absolutely yes. But I've had many moments in my life where Tower energy was really empowering. Tower energy can be a breakthrough. It's not always a breakdown. It can be a breakthrough. So if I saw a card like the Tower in things to bring in, I would think about how can you set the tone and facilitate space for yourself to have a breakthrough. I hope that gives you some helpful things to think about. Okay, let's see here. I think those were the main things on that. Oh, actually, this is one more thing I wanted to mention on this note. Okay. Yeah. So, let's see. Sometimes I look at my notes and I'm like, dear past self, what in the heck? Because my notes are chaos. But speaking of the Tower, my notes are chaos. Anyways, yeah, this is another tip. So I already mentioned the tip of asking how you can pare spread positions down to their essence, where you have maybe one or two words that sum up the essence of what that spread position is. And another tip that I have is to be really conscious and be really curious about what ways you can take that. So I want to give a specific example because it's a little vague how I'm phrasing this, but again, in that spread that I mentioned that I've been using for my clients lately, I also have a spread position called challenges. Now, I'm often telling my clients that the position itself, although the title I give the position is challenges, I really think of that position as a message around challenges. So there would be one way of thinking about that position where I would be very literal and a card would come up in that position and I would say, oh, that card itself is the challenge. But framing that card as a message around challenges gives more room for the card to breathe. It doesn't pigeonhole you in quite as much. So that's interrelated to the tip I talked about earlier of making sure that your spread positions are not too specific. You want to find just the sweet spot where they're giving you something concentrated, but you want to make sure that there's room in that position for the card to move how it needs to move, to speak in the way that it wants to speak. This is a very subtle process, but if you can really think about this and really practice this, I promise you it will make your spreads so much more enhanced. It will make them flow more smoothly, and it will make you feel like you're just so much more tapped in when you're doing your readings. All right. What else? Oh yeah, okay, I think still talking about this topic of what to do when a card just doesn't make sense within a spread position. If all else fails, let it sit, move away, go on with your life, go for a walk, go do the tasks you need to do. This is another thing I say all the time, but there are instances where you just need to let it marinate. You need to kind of let it marinate in your subconscious. You need to not force it. You need to go away from the spread, and then often when you least expect it, it comes. I can't snap. Can't do it. But often when you least expect it, the message of that card comes to you, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's what that was telling me. This is again something I'm saying all the time, but when you're working with tarot, you want it to feel spacious. You want it to feel calm. You want it to feel, I don't want to say you want it to feel good, because again, it can always feel challenging, but if you're trying to force it, and if you're getting really stressed out, that's not conducive to finding the message you need to find. So be in that place of curiosity, be in that place of, I wonder what this card is saying to me within this spread position, instead of, oh my gosh, what is this card saying to me in the spread position? I wonder what this card is saying to me. I wonder what it's saying, and just wait for that answer to come. And it might come right away, or again, it might come in a day, it might come in a week. So let yourself sit with it. So I think those are the main things before now we're ready to move on, and we're going to talk about some advice, some tips on creating your own spreads. Someone asked about this a moment ago, and I already mentioned I do have a blog post on this topic from a couple of years ago. One of the things I really like about the blog post that might be helpful for some of you is I list quite a few of the positions that I commonly incorporate into my spread. I'll read through them really quickly, but I know it's going to be kind of fast. So if you want to see these in written form, you can find them on my blog. But I have things like themes, challenges, strengths, advice, unseen factors, energy to release, energy to bring in, unconscious influences, conscious influences, main energy to be aware of right now, advice on navigating current energy, lessons available, blessings, blocks, synthesis. Those are just a few things that can get you started with positions that I find work really well. And again, they're all on my blog, so I know I just kind of blasted through them. Okay, so let's go into 3 tips for creating your own spreads. First tip, consider what you really want to get from the spread. This is actually a great tip for when you are going to work with a spread someone else created as well. You want to make sure, to the best of your ability, that the spread that you are creating, the spread you are going to work with, resonates with what it is that you actually want to get from that reading. I know that sounds like it goes without saying, but even just jotting down some notes of like, this is why I'm creating this spread. This is the theme that's coming up for me. This is how I'm feeling. This is the type of advice I want to get. Taking some notes about those types of things can often inspire you. You can go through those notes you've written down and say, oh, that particular piece I talked about right there, that could actually be a spread position. That could be incorporated into the spread. So again, I know it sounds so simple and like it goes without saying, but sometimes it needs to be said, okay? All right, tip number 2. This is super common, but one really good framework, a framework that I really like, that a lot of other tarot readers really like for creating your own tarot spread, is to think about an object that has some type of symbolism that resonates with the theme you're trying to get to, trying to explore with that spread that you're creating. An example of this is back in December, Annie and I hosted a little winter solstice workshop for the Spacious Tarot, and I created a spread called Your Lantern, which is inspired by the lantern in our Hermit card in the Spacious Tarot. So once you've chosen your symbolic object, that can help inspire some of your spread positions. With that, for example, with that lantern spread I created, we had positions like solitude, illumination, clearing, because those are all words that tie into that imagery in our Hermit card. So that's a really cool way for you to create your own spread, is think about a symbolic object and help that ground your spread positions. That's also a really good way to help ensure, we talked earlier about this idea of the spread positions singing to each other. If the spread positions are inspired by some type of object, then they naturally have that harmony. They naturally tie in together. And then the third tip, and this is going to sound kind of funny, maybe, but this is something that I really like to do, is try, once you have come up with a few, again, I think the sweet spot for me is about 3 to 5 positions usually. So once you have come up with your spread positions, something that I often like to do as a bonus, and I'll especially do this if maybe I've only come up with 3 positions and I want to add a little more, is to add positions for opening messages and closing messages. Those are a couple other positions that I incorporate in the spread that I've been using with my clients lately. And I really like that because I talked about spread positions. I always want them to have the right level of room within them. And for me, the opening message and the closing message is completely open-ended. So then I have 2 positions in the spread where I really know whatever wants to come forward, whatever needs to come forward, if it doesn't fit in any of the other spread positions, has a space to present itself. And that also gives you a really lovely bookend for your reading, because you have sort of an introductory message and then you have a message to wrap things up. Those are also 2 positions that sing to each other. I'll often find when I'm doing readings with my clients that as we're finishing the reading, I'm looking at both the opening message and the closing message and saying to my client, oh, look at this. This is interesting, like the tie-in between these 2 cards. So, okay, that is it. That is what I have for our time together today. It's everything I had to talk about with tarot spreads. If you are here live and you have any comments or you have any questions, you are very welcome to let me know. Let me know if you do. And thank you for being here. I appreciate it. Anyone? I see hearts. I always feel awkward, like waiting to see if anyone's going to comment. This is going to have to be the part where I do a dance, except I truly cannot dance. So someone better have a comment, or you just have to see me grooving. Great workshop. I'm so glad. Isabel, I appreciate that feedback. That's lovely. I see a few thank yous. That was super helpful. You guys are welcome. I'm really glad. How long do you spend with a client for a 9-card spread? 1 hour. I do 1 hour sessions. By the way, if anyone is interested in working with me, I guess I'll plug that. I am open at the moment for bookings. You can get all the details at carriemallon.com. But right now I do 1 hour sessions, and this spread that I've mentioned a few times that I usually do with my clients is 9 cards. And usually I find 1 hour gives us the perfect amount of time to move through that 9-card spread. But of course the answer would vary for everyone. You know, it kind of depends if you're reading for yourself, if you're reading for someone else. I see more thank yous. I'm so glad it was helpful, you guys. Okay, as we're wrapping up then, I'm going to put out a humble request, which is if you guys enjoy these workshops, these tarot gatherings that I've been hosting, I would really appreciate if you could help me spread the word, like maybe share in your stories, or if you have friends who read tarot, let me know, because I love doing them, but it is, it's a bit of effort to put them together and put them out there, and so it would be great if I could get them expanded and let them help more people. So if you guys feel inclined, obviously, if you don't, that's perfectly fine. But if you're willing to share, that would be super cool. All right, so let's see. What are we doing next week? We will be back next Tuesday, same time, same place. And next week we are talking, next week is the court cards. Get ready. We're talking about court cards. It's happening. Next Tuesday, court cards, same time, same place, Instagram Live. Replay is always on IGTV if you can't be here for the live sessions. Okay, guys, thanks again, and take good care until I see you next time. Okay, bye-bye.